MMAfighting.com, and we're in Melbourne, Australia, ahead of UFC 243. We're just hours away from the main event, and we have been joined by the MMA media authorities in this part of the world. It is the Submission Radio boys, Casper and Dennis. I didn't go for the second names. I had to play it safe. Well, first of all, lads, how are you? It's great to see you over here. Dennis.
Well, okay, we are the authority down here, which is why you see the crime rate is up and no one can get through the streets. But, you know, we're enjoying the label. It's really good. We get a free upgrade at the cafes when we go in if we put on our crowns. So, no, it's great to be here, man. Look at this. Melbourne, Australia, and we're super excited to be with Pete, here with Petey, man. I mean, this is a long time coming.
The highlight of the week, right, Petey?
For me, anyway, definitely. No, but I wanted to ask you, Casper, now, I saw just in there, that was the first time I saw Adesanya kind of booed at the weigh-ins earlier. All week, it kind of felt like the crowd was divided. It was going to be both on Whittaker's side and Adesanya's. But then suddenly I'm getting the feeling that the crowd are going more towards Whittaker. I haven't blatantly seen that all week, but I just saw it this morning at the weigh-ins. What do you think of it?
I think Israel Adesanya is a very personable guy. I think anybody that meets him, you know, one-on-one or in a group will say, man, he's a really cool, really nice guy. I think with the open workouts, when there's just him on the stage and he's obviously performing in front of everybody, he's giving away, you know, knee pads and stuff like that. Of course, they're going to cheer him. But, you know, when you get Rob next to him, it's like Israel's a great guy until Rob enters the picture. And then, of course, the Aussies are going to cheer for him. And, you know, UFC 234 kind of gave us a preview of that. Anderson Silva, zero connection to Australia whatsoever, other than the fact that, you know, the Aussie MMA fans love him because he's a legend. He was cheered and Israel Adesanya was booed. So I'm not surprised at all that Robert Whittaker is the heavy favorite. And I think regardless of the performance, you know, Israel Adesanya is going to be expecting, or not expecting, but, you know, facing a lot of boos when he enters the stadium this Sunday.
And I think the funny thing is, with the Anderson Silva fight, I think the thing that surprised me, I don't know if it surprised you, Cass, is Israel actually got more boos at that Israel fight than he did when he came out against, like, Robert Whittaker. And it was like, you'd think that Robert Whittaker would, you know, that's like Anderson Silva, and we love the international fighters here. But I think if you're Israel Adesanya, I think he was expecting much worse. Like, it's been pretty good. Like, we've had some comments from people that are really big Rob supporters, but it hasn't been anything too crazy. And his perception from fans here in Melbourne has been crazy. Like, people have been coming and cheering him. Like, when he came out, like, he got a little bit of a cheer. They were very emotional looking at his family. So it's going to be interesting to see how much boos there really will be during fight. Now, probably a lot, but I think Israel is expecting the worst.
A little bit of insight on that also, not to go on a tangent, but there's a thing here called tall poppy syndrome. Obviously, some of the first immigrants here in Australia were convicts. As a convict, you don't have many rights. How do you elevate yourself in society? You bring everybody else down to make yourself seem like the tallest flower, right? So any sports people in Australia, you'll never see them with too bravado, too much like, I'm the best, I'm the greatest, because they will get cut down and shredded by public opinion. And I think that's kind of Rob to a T. You're never going to see him saying, I'm awesome. He's very humble. If you throw him a compliment, he'll just kind of say, oh, I'm all right, I'm okay. Israel Adesanya is very kind of brash. You know, he's kind of markets more to the US kind of people, almost like, you know, Drake and hip hop, that kind of culture. So I think that's kind of why we're seeing that clash of styles and personalities as well, that, you know, the people just love Rob because of the way he is.
You know, he has so much hype behind him here. I feel like that's a lot of expectation to kind of wear coming into a fight. You know what I mean? Everything's happened so quickly for Stylebender. Do you feel like this will be a jittery moment when he's going out here? Like, we just saw the fans getting behind Whittaker. Do you feel as though this could potentially get to him?
Dude, you know what? It's really interesting because you look at both situations. Robert Whittaker hasn't been paid to fight in quite some time. So financially, he's really stuffed up there, like in the sense that he needs to get out there. He needs to make a paycheck for his family. He's also coming into a fight where if he loses, this isn't going to be like a Max Holloway situation where we know Max is going to get an immediate rematch. Like, this guy is going to be pushed well down in the middleweight rankings. Like, you got Paulo Costa there and stuff like that. The UFC aren't going to be trying to push him back up. And then also, if he loses to Israel after this really long build-up, you know, people haven't been really giving Whittaker much, I suppose, props, especially through his whole career. And this could be the thing that people are like, yeah, well, but, you know, Israel did beat him at that stadium, blah, 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 blah. So for me, I almost feel like Whittaker has more on the line, whereas Israel Adesanya, yeah, okay, he came up pretty quick and stuff like that. But if he loses to Robert Whittaker, I mean, maybe he wins another fight. Maybe he fights John Jones in a stadium somehow. Maybe he wants to fight Stipe in a stadium in New Zealand. This is a guy that the UFC is going to get right behind and book him straight in there and get him straight up back to a title shot. So for me, when I look at both situations, I actually think Rob's got way more pressure on him, way more riding on this fight. So, and don't forget this as well. it's kind of a side thing, but like he's got a documentary following him around, like they're doing a little movie. He's got a speaking tour booked in around Australia after this as well. And, so I think a lot of the business stuff to do with that will also depend on whether or not he wins or loses. So there's a bit of pressure going on.
And I kind of feel like Robert Whittaker, I've always said this, there's parallels between him and Stipe Miocic, whereas Stipe was kind of like the champion that the UFC was a little bit reluctant to promote because there were other more marketable stars in the division, guys like Ngannou. And Robert Whittaker, he's not a guy that says a lot in interviews. He does all of his speaking and his talking through his actions. And, the biggest action is obviously him being the champion. So I think if he loses, that's sort of a big blow for him. Whereas Israel Adesanya, he's so marketable. Like you said, he could face, John Jones. He's, throwing out there that maybe he'll fight Stipe Miocic. I think that, his career will just keep going up and up. I don't think he even needs the belt to, really be marketable.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, I feel like we haven't seen Whittaker in so long, as you guys mentioned, but he looks ridiculous. I mean, the shape he was in at that open workout.
5 kilos of muscle.
Yeah, I mean, you can see it's notable. Like, I mean, it's pretty evident that he's probably in the best shape of his life ahead of this. And I feel like with so much hype coming in on the back of Adesanya, this is a massively valuable win for him. Okay, Yoel Romero, the boogeyman of this division, definitely. But the hype that Adesanya has, the numbers he's generating, I think this could potentially be a fight that could push Rob's star into a new stratosphere. Never mind Adesanya's, right?
Well, I think it's kind of like, one of the stories has been that Israel has been doing all this marketing. He's been, there's been a little bit of trash talk here. He feels like he's the A side. And it's almost like I don't know, to use a bad analogy, it's like a baseball pitch. And whoever hits it is going to hit it out of the park. If Rob beats Israel, I feel like, in a pro wrestling sense, he gets the rub. He steals all of Israel's kind of, hype and momentum. We saw that with Ben Askren and Jorge Masvidal, right?
Absolutely.
Ben Askren was going in there with so much momentum. People were kind of overlooking Jorge Masvidal. And then he knocked him out in 5 seconds. Now it's the Jorge Masvidal show. Not to say that Ben Askren's forgotten, but he just took all of that momentum. And I think Robert Whittaker could kind of, again, this would be the story of his career, right? Didn't say a whole lot, does all of his speaking through his actions. And if he beats Israel, nothing could be bigger for him.
And it kind of reminds me, while we're talking about Aussies and that are Kiwis, Mark Hunt, when he fought Brock Lesnar. Do you guys remember that UFC 200? Me and Casper were there, and he was on the cusp. If he beat Brock Lesnar in that fight, I mean, people don't really remember it, but he would have been a bona fide superstar. Like, his name would be everywhere. Like, he was one step away from that, and he didn't get that win. I feel like Robert Whittaker is in the same position. Now, Israel Adesanya, maybe he's not on quite the level of Brock Lesnar, but he's close. And if Rob wins this fight, and he's been away for a while, and he mentioned to us, like, hey, I want to fight John Jones. Hey, I want to do this. I get a sense from him, like, he wants to get the most out of his career now because he knows he's not going to be around forever. This could be the beginning of that journey for him, but he's got to get it done tomorrow afternoon.
What do the Australian fans see in Ali Aquinta that they seem to love so much? Like, I mean, him and Dan are like 2 fan favorites, obviously, and both heavily supported over here. But I really can't get over how he was embraced at that open workout earlier on this week. What is it about Ali Aquinta that you guys love so much?
Dude, first of all, there's a bit of history there. He was at the first ever event that me and Casper covered. So us personally, we have a great sort of connection with him. He beat Ross Pearson on that one. But the thing is, Al is one of those guys where the Australians love because he went in there, on short notice. He fought Khabib. Like, this guy really sort of embodies what the Australians love, like the Cowboy Cerrones, the Justin Gaethjes, the guys that go out there and fight. And he's an example of Australia getting behind international talent with some name value. You saw the same thing with Anderson Silva. A lot of people will say, the UFC will say, well, we've got a lot of local talent on this card, so everybody's going to be excited. But that's a lie. What people down here want to see is names from overseas coming over. I think there's a bit of appreciation for Al.
Yeah.
Because he's kind of like the only kind of star that came over from overseas that did it. I mean, I'm not sure
He was willing to do it. It wasn't like you have to fight here. He was like, I want to fly all the way to the other side of the world. I want to fight in Australia.
Yeah, so I mean, at the end of the day, he's kind of flying the flag for those international talent and for those people that paid huge amounts of money for the tickets. And by the way, like, they discounted the tickets at one point. I believe it almost got down to something like $35 for right up the back, which is crazy when you convert it to American and other currencies. So
$20, right? About $25.
yeah, I mean, how great is that to see the fights? It's like, do you want to go watch a movie? Do you want to go see a terrible movie like the new Rambo, or do you want to go see the card? Last Blood, UFC. Last Blood, Rambo, let's go with the UFC. So he's flying the flag for that international talent, and I think people appreciate it.
I think Dan Hooker, it's funny, they're kind of parallels of each other. Like, everything you said about Al can be said about Dan Hooker. Like, he's so tough, he goes out there like a warrior. He doesn't do a lot of talking either, but I love when Dan Hooker gets on the mic. It's like he speaks very slowly, very calmly, but you want to listen. Everything he says is with such conviction, and he doesn't really waste any words. He tells you exactly what he wants. And I think with Dan Hooker, part of the story here, there's a lot of narratives. One of them is kind of like CKB versus the World City Kickboxing.
Yes.
You got Israel in the main event. You got Dan Hooker in the co-main event. You've obviously got Brad Riddell making his debut. Also, what's interesting about this card is some of the stars from Australia and this region that the UFC originally predicted to be big are no longer really those stars, and other guys kind of took over. UFC Fight Night, Hunt versus Miocic in Adelaide, right, where Robert Whittaker beat Brad Tavares. At the time, Jake Matthews was undefeated, I believe, 7-0, lost to James Vick, but he was kind of like the flag bearer. He was the next great hope for Australian MMA. And they kind of, there was a shift, and Robert Whittaker obviously ended up becoming the champion, and Jake Matthews is a little bit lower on the card. I think same thing with Dan Hooker. He was that guy for New Zealand at the time fighting a featherweight. He's in the co-main event. He's on a pretty good run at the moment, but then in came Israel and just, about a year and a half just took everything by storm. So this is kind of like the new generation of guys. A lot of the guys at UFC 193, the Aussies, they're either retired or they've gone on to do other things. And this is the new generation, the new crop of guys that were on that card, and they've come up higher now.
And I was going to say just quickly, PT, when it comes to that co-main event, there's a lot on the line. Now, I don't want to be a matchmaker. Eugene Behrman was a matchmaker. He started talking about the Stipe fight for Israel. So I'm going to try and do my own thing right here. I think for Al, if he beats Dan, he's got a real shot at getting Justin Gaethje. I don't know if this Justin Gaethje, Conor McGregor thing is going to work out. There's some history there. And then if you're Dan and you beat Al, you got a real shot of fighting Cowboy Cerrone. And I believe that's a fight that could headline a fight night card in New Zealand or another great co-main if it's another big stadium show in New Zealand.
But also, you look at the guys that have faced Ally Quinter, like Khabib couldn't finish him, Donald Cerrone couldn't finish him. Imagine if Dan Hooker comes out here and finishes Ally Quinter. Given Al's ranking, I think he's at number 4 at the moment, I want to say. It skyrockets.
6, I believe.
6?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm an idiot. But it skyrockets Dan Hooker into that kind of like, elite top level of the lightweight division. And that's something that he's been chasing for a long time now.
Is the criticism of this card well-founded? A lot of people have said that there is nothing more to this card outside of the main and co-main events. I mean, for you guys personally, you know a lot of the people on this card, but do you understand that criticism from an international point of view, Dennis?
Yeah, dude, absolutely. I mean, at the end of the day, people expected Alex Volkanovski versus Max Holloway to co-main event this
That would have
card.
been huge, right? That would have been. I thought it would
I
have
think all
rivaled.
would be forgiven if we had that card, because then it's like 2 massive fights, 2 title fights. I think everybody will be loving this one. I think there's a lot of like great names, and they're all memorable for Aussies. I just don't think there's a lot of stakes behind them, because most of the Aussies here, they're trying to rebound from losses, and so there's fights that may end up being great, entertaining fights, but there's just no stakes. It doesn't really move anyone up in the division. I think that's what people are frustrated about, and it's absolutely true. 234 was criticized. I think this one you can even criticize even more. And like you were saying, Dennis, the Aussie fans, they want the international guys. They want people from Brazil, people from US. They want fights that matter. And here there's really only 1 or 2.
Now, is there any way in your minds, because you guys have a much better grasp of this situation than I do, that this could sell as much as 193? It could go to 56,000. We talked about the tickets being lowered down a very competitive price. Even if people just wanted to buy a ticket to go to the main event, like it would seem worth it, right, at that price. Do you think this can compete with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think so, because, we were trying to look through the tickets and stuff like that, and it looks like even the tickets right up the back, there's not many pairings left and stuff since the UFC has been running this $35 marketing. Now, I have a marketing background, so I could quickly speak on the fact that the UFC has spent a ton of money marketing this event. If you guys have been around the city, you'd see there's billboards, TV advertisements, radio advertisements, and they're still going now. That's not normal for a fight card. Usually they'll stop.
More so than 193 with that?
More so, way more so than 193. Don't forget, that was Ronda Rousey coming to Melbourne. That was Melbourne the first time having legal MMA. That was huge. People didn't know what MMA was, but they knew what Ronda Rousey is. So at the end of the day, they would have spent a ton of money on marketing, and they would have lost money by dropping the ticket prices. But dropping those ticket prices, I think, has sold quite a few tickets. Me and Casper have a theory. People are waiting till tomorrow morning to make sure Robert Whittaker is still fighting Israel Adesanya, and they're going straight. People are pretty chill here, so they might go straight to the stadium and try and pick up a ticket on the spot, $35, $40 just to watch the main event.
I think you got to remember it's Sunday morning, so I think some people are like, let's see how destroyed we get on Saturday night. Let's see if we actually wake up, and then if we do, then we'll go see the fights. I'm kind of eating my words here, because when this event was coming together, we knew it was going to be Rob versus Israel. I heard a lot of people from Sydney were like, I don't know, Rob Whittaker in the main event. We know what happened with 234. Some people kind of burned. You got to remember, you're paying for flights, you're paying for accommodation. It's a bit of an investment on a fan's part, and I think people waiting to see how that would play out. But I'm and then there's the fact that, like, with Marvel Stadium, the vision is not the greatest if you're sitting all the way up the back. And I know a lot of the casual fans that came to see Ronda Rousey were kind of leaving that stadium like, man, I couldn't really see a whole lot. I was disappointed. And I thought that, that will be something stuck in people's mind. I don't know. I think this speaks to the sort of marketability of Robert Whittaker here as a local, and also Israel Adesanya, that like 40,000 tickets were sold, and that was weeks ago. I think that was all the way in August. So I'm actually very curious where the final number lands, and I think there's a really good chance that it is going to break the record.
And don't forget this, PT, just quickly. Recently, Australia played America in this very stadium 2 nights, and it was so much PR about how terrible the view is. This is possibly one of the worst sort of stadiums to watch an event like this in, and that was a basketball court. Russell Crowe was tweeting about how he spent a few $1,000s and couldn't see anything. He was sitting right up the front.
Russell.
No, and he's not a guy that would usually complain, right?
As long as he's using his phone for tweeting and nothing else.
That's right, yeah. We're not sure where that phone ended up, but anyway. So that's right, yeah. So there's that aspect of it. And also, Casper mentioned Sydney, the NRL Grand Final. Now, it's not the Super Bowl. It's not the whole country. Victoria is an AFL town. We just had our Grand Final at the MCG, 100,000 strong with a public holiday so we could watch the parade last weekend. So they're all here. But when it comes to New South Wales, they are glued for that Grand Final at night time. So that stops from a lot of people from traveling, which makes it even more impressive, the fact that they were able to get stuff in the newspaper this week, and also that they were able to sell out this many tickets.
Can I just say one thing as well that I think you guys did awesomely this week? The UFC had put a lot of weight behind the New Zealand versus Australia thing, and I was glad to see you guys kind of cleared that up with Whittaker. Was that weird for you guys? Because it was kind of strange to me, because I always knew that the two countries kind of get on famously, right?
Yeah, I think it's kind of something that people had to be enlightened on and educated a little bit, because I think, and like we were talking to Aaron Bronstetter for TSN, I think a lot of people aren't sure what is the rivalry between New Zealand and Australia, and I would probably describe it best as frenemies. It's like if you have brothers, right? You're competitive, you want to fight with your brothers, but at the end of the day, you love each other. And I think like the rivalry between Australia and New Zealand is like more about like slang, right? Like flip-flops, we call them thongs, they call it jandals, and other little things like that. There's the rivalry between the Wallabies and the All Blacks. Other than that, we're friends, They like barbecues, we like barbecues, they like drinking, we're so close. And like Aussies always claim Kiwis and New Zealanders all the time. Russell Crowe, he's pretty big, yeah. Oh, he's our guy all of a sudden. Mark Hunt, he's doing well. Yeah, he lives in Sydney. He's our guy. Same thing with Robert Whittaker. I mean, here's the thing. If any Aussies are going to be watching Israel Adesanya, the only time they're going to be booing him is when he's fighting an Aussie. Every other time, they're going to be cheering for him. So there's not really a rivalry there, or at least not the one that's been sort of perpetuated.
And the funny thing is, like, you guys have your, like, Veterans Day or whatever in the States, and I don't know what happens where you're from, Pete, because, yeah, I don't know what you do in your private time, you sicko, but what happens over here is we have Anzac Day, and that's the Australian and New Zealand forces working together over at the war. A lot of people passed away at, and that's where the sort of soldiers come out, and that's the day of remembrance where everybody goes, and there's a minute of silence, and there's a parade and stuff like that. So we've always worked with the Kiwis, and it's just like, Dan Hooker and Eugene Behrman and a lot of these guys will say, like, and also Rob's coach said this to us actually when we interviewed him. It's like, if there's no Aussies competing and there's a Kiwi, we back the Kiwis. If there's no Kiwis competing and they see an Aussie, they back the Aussies. So we're always adopting each other. I've got the Kiwi girlfriend. Dan's got the Australian wife, so that's how it is, man.
Well, finally, guys, and thank you so much for all the information. That's really, really great stuff. I really feel like I know more about the event now, but I've got to put you on the spot before we go anywhere. So firstly, Casper, the main event, who have you got, Whittaker or Adesanya? Who will have their hand raised on Sunday morning?
I'm a big flip-flopper, but I do have...
A jandler.
I'm a jandler. Yeah, I have a feeling about Robert Whittaker. I feel like he has so much to prove here. The 5 kilos of extra muscle. I mean, he's been speaking about how he's in the best shape of his life, and I feel like his stand-up attack is actually a little bit underrated. It's very diverse. Obviously, Dan Hardy and John Gooden did a great job of breaking that down. His stance is kind of very square. He can sort of hit you with power shots from either side, and I think he's a little bit... I don't want to say more multifaceted, because I think Israel Adesanya thus far has displayed really, really good takedown defense, and I feel like he hasn't been tested on the ground in a long time. So if it does go to the ground, he might shock us as far as, what he's able to show us there. I think that Robert Whittaker is going to go in there, sort of try and put the pressure on Israel very, very early and not let him get comfortable. I think it really comes down to that. Who is able to employ the distance? Is Israel going to be able to play the distance game and sort of control Robert Whittaker from the outside and get comfortable? Or is Robert Whittaker going to sort of push the pace and put the pressure and make him uncomfortable? I think we're going to see things in the first maybe 1 or 2 rounds, and that's going to kind of dictate the fight. So I am leaning towards Robert Whittaker, but only so slightly.
Yeah, like as Pat said, it's really interesting because at the end of the day, you know, when Israel gets his rhythm, you'd think he'd be able to figure out Robert Whittaker because he's an unorthodox striker and all that. Comes a lot of surprise, but also him being open in a lot of positions. But at the same time, then you got the question of, can Robert Whittaker secure sort of a takedown later on in the fight, maybe sort of around round 3 or something if the fight's still going, and sort of stay on top long enough to sort of wear Israel out, make sure that his arms and legs aren't as fresh as they once were. If he's able to do that at some point in the fight, sort of win around, wear Israel down, this fight could end up in a very different way. And also, will he be able to catch Israel before Israel figures out his movements? Everybody's sort of been trying to figure out Rob for quite some time, but it's like with Nate Diaz. Once you get in there, it's a bit different than what you do with your training partners. We saw Anthony Pettis couldn't do it. I wonder what it's going to happen with Israel. And lastly, with Israel, even though he's a remarkable striker, great head movement, feints, all sorts of things, he does keep his hands down, and his chin is out. And Robert Whittaker is extremely quick. And because his shots are so unorthodox and he comes from so many angles, Israel's not a safe boxer that's got his hands up the whole time. So there's a chance that he can land. So it's going to be very, very interesting. My prediction is I think Israel's going to win it. I think Israel's going to do it, right? That's my prediction. Because I think he's going to stop the takedowns and I think he's going to be able to implement his striking. But it's like, as the New Zealanders say, an ant's dick. That's how close my prediction is. So it could flip either way. And if Rob wins, there would be no surprise. I think this is the hardest title fight to predict. I mentioned it before in UFC history. Would I be right?
This reminds me of like what, do you remember what Rockhold versus Weidman was, back in 2015? Like 2 of the absolute best, and you almost couldn't see either guy losing. This is like the new generation of that. And not for nothing, not that this really has anything to do with the outcome of the fight, but there's this notion that I want to dispel that like Israel is a skinny guy. I don't know if you had the same thing, Pete, at the open workouts, but when you see Israel up close, like he's a pretty thick, dense dude. Like maybe his silhouette isn't that big, but you can see the muscles are very dense, and he's a lot bigger in real life than what you see on the screen. He's a lot stronger looking as well than what people see.
Well, there you have it. Thank you so much, lads. That was absolutely brilliant. I really hope everybody enjoys the fights. Make sure you check out Submission Radio with Casper and Dennis, these two beautiful men. Oh, really? Well, look at this, huh? I hope you all have a good time. It's tomorrow morning at the Marvel Stadium. All the best.